With the latest agriculture news from across the state and nation, it's time for the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. Here's your host, Sabrina Halvorson.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us today on the AgNet News Hour. Coming up later, grower-collaborators are needed for a rice research project. We'll have more details. But our top story today, AgriPulse held its 2024 Food and Ag Policy Issues Summit in Sacramento on Tuesday. One of the guests they had on stage was California Secretary of Agriculture, Karen Ross. She talked with AgriPulse's Brad Hooker on the topic of making California agriculture more resilient. Here's a bit of that conversation.
You were there for the Great Recession and the aftermath of that. Some really tough decisions going for that. It's a lot different now, of course. Thank goodness. But how do you gauge the priorities for the program? Some of these programs are really important, very special to you. How do you prioritize the spending?
So first of all, I'm going to say, yes, this is a difficult budget year, but it's all about one-time funding. We had extraordinary circumstances that presented billions of dollars. That has never happened. I've never worked in an atmosphere with that happening over a short period of time, as opposed to my first almost 3 years, we were cutting core programs. I established a collaborative process with stakeholders so that we weren't making decisions about cuts when we were also making decisions about layoffs without input from stakeholders to help us with our priorities, that we could not set it in a vacuum. We tend to do that a lot in Sacramento. We have the answer, here it is, and we've got to have that engagement. This is a very different scenario, and because I am an optimist, which is about a belief and expectations grounded in reality, but I will never stop believing. I thank you so much. It's the allergy season with the wind. I feel that we have had an extraordinary opportunity to make investments that hopefully will prove out climate-smart agriculture, and we've seen tremendous momentum around that by a lot of people who would never apply for one of our incentive grants. We've invested in the livestock industry. The dairy families have been leaders in methane reductions on a global basis, that we were able to give incentives to prove out a business case. What we've done with Farm to School is exactly the perfect fit for what was up here. Starting at the youngest age, introducing from the youngest age possible the joy of fruits and vegetables and healthy eating and healthy lifestyle that will avoid those chronic diseases and the huge costs of health care that so many people towards the end of life are now proving out. It's not a sustainable system. So that kind of an investment and seeing the momentum around that, building out a marketplace to support local small scale, which has nothing to do with interfere with our global prowess. It's about making sure we've got resilience in that local system. We were able, with baseline funding, thanks to the First Partners advocacy as well, to establish 16 regional navigators to connect the local farming community with those school nutrition directors, which was hugely important because many of them don't know what's growing in their backyard, let alone how do I get the volume I need. And a very important part of these one-time funds was over $400 million put into kitchen equipment and culinary training. You can give kids a plate and tell them it's healthy, but if it's not getting eaten, it's not going to get you the outcomes you're looking for. This is a very holistic way of approaching improving health outcomes, the whole child outcomes, and it has a very strong component for experiential learning so that children can discover what it is to grow and where food comes from, as well as the environment that we're growing it in and changing climate. These are the kinds of things we've had in total across all of our agencies, just for sustainable agriculture, over $1 billion. Healthy soils, on-farm water use efficiency, livestock methane reduction, pollinator habitat, the Sustainable Ag Land Conservation Program through the Strategic Growth Council, almost $400 million invested in long-term easements on a voluntary basis, almost $500 million in the Farmer Program for engine replacement, over $200 million at the Energy Commission for food processing, energy efficiency, that has had faster payoffs for every one of the people that got those grants. Their return on the investment for that energy efficiency was less than half the time that they calculated that it would be. It's putting stuff on the ground and also investing in technical assistance, which will last much longer. It makes sure that everybody has access to the information how to do this. And I think the healthcare system and other institutional procurement, not just schools, will walk into this space, but it was like a panel before us that's helped building out the marketplace. Sorry for the long answer, but I'm pretty passionate about what we have done, and I'm grateful for it. I'm the only cabinet secretary that is a senior citizen, and the only one that's been there through really tough times. I'm the only one I spend half my time being grateful that we've had these dollars to spend, that we got to try to prove it out, and that we're being hopefully smart and strategic about where those investments are going. Okay, I'm going to stop.
We'll have more from the Food and Ag Policy Summit later in the show. You're listening to the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. In today's National Spotlight, food production by farmers and civilians was a key factor in the success of the D-Day invasion 80 years ago this week. Gary Crawford has this report.
Let's take you back now to June 6th, 1944, off the shores of Normandy, France.
Heavy firing now just behind us, and anti-aircraft burst in the sky, and bombs bursting on the shore.
ABC radio reporter George Hicks recording the first hours of D-Day.
And along in the convoys of the planes that are beginning their first attack on the night of June 6th.
D-Day, the biggest amphibious invasion in history, 155,000 soldiers who not only had to be well supplied with weapons and ammunition, but also, very important, food, which made the Allied troops
ready to fight, ready to do whatever was needed because they were well fed.
In fact, Agriculture Department historical expert Ann Efland says food was a key factor that not only helped make the D-Day invasion successful, but the entire U.S. war effort. This was a fact that President Roosevelt realized when, just after Pearl Harbor, some 30 months before D-Day, he told farmers,
"You have a most grave responsibility to the nation now and for the duration of this war."
And so Ann Efland says the country's farmers geared up to produce food like never before under conditions that made it very difficult.
They had to overcome some of the shortages. There were restrictions on use of rubber and steel, which affected use of farm machinery. So there was a lot of effort to help farmers understand how to better repair machinery that they already had, to share machinery around different regions to be sure there was enough.
Of course, another problem, many of the country's young men, including farmers, were being drafted and were going off to war. And the early 40s was a time when farming was much more labor-intensive than today.
So there were efforts to mobilize women, rural women, and bring in women from urban areas to mobilize high school boys and girls to work on the farms.
But farms were not the only fronts for wartime food production.
On the land and the sea, let's swing out to victory.
Yes, it was everyone's job to help the country to victory by making as much food available to the troops as possible.
One of the ways to help reduce the civilian demand on the food supply was to encourage them to grow their own, and there was a movement called the Victory Garden movement to encourage, even in urban areas, producing your own vegetables and fruits in particular.
That extra food came in handy because during the war, food was rationed, especially meats, milk, sugar, and coffee, each household getting a ration book of coupons for various food items, again making more food available to the troops and allowing President Roosevelt to tell the country that because of all of the efforts on the food front,
there is enough food today for all of us, and enough left over to send to those who are fighting on the same side with us,
including those who landed on the beaches at Normandy. This is Gary Crawford reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
That's today's National Spotlight. Now here's the Livestock Report. The recently announced Poultry Grower Payment Systems and Capital Improvement Systems rule focuses on a way to improve fairness within the poultry tournament paying system. Rod Bain has more.
It is the latest in a series of efforts to address abuses in what is known in the poultry industry as the tournament payment system, and in turn, improve fairer markets within the Packers and Stockyards Act.
USDA is announcing that it will publish a new proposed rule entitled Poultry Grower Payment Systems and Capital Improvement Systems.
Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack told reporters during a recent media call the formal rule will soon be published in the Federal Register, followed by a 60-day public comment period. The proposed final rule would
prohibit using a grower's grouping, ranking, or comparison to other growers to discount or to reduce a rate of compensation that is disclosed in a broader growing arrangement. That is to say, the base pay would be the clearly disclosed minimum pay under the contract, and growers could then, from that point forward, get bonuses for performance.
The new rule also requires poultry companies to provide a fair comparison among growers within a tournament payment system,
and to establish and comply with written procedures and policies that document how they would meet and how they have in fact met that duty.
Determination tools to assess risk associated with capital improvement practices are also part of this new rule, designed to help growers better determine and USDA to better enforce existing prohibitions on unfair capital improvement practices.
This proposed rule would do this by requiring disclosures of nature, purpose, and financial opportunities and risks for growers around additional capital investments. Information augments existing regulations that prohibit capital improvement programs that are coercive or where the grower cannot reasonably expect to recoup the investment.
A complementary announcement involves a new livestock mandatory reporting live cattle data dashboard to be operated by the Agricultural Marketing Service,
which will give users the ability to access and analyze intuitively and in detail past and present market data that can be easily downloaded into a spreadsheet for further analysis. AMS is also going to provide additional information on formula marketing arrangements and quality grade price distribution to provide greater transparency to the cattle markets.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. We will be back in just a moment with more agriculture news. Coming up in a few moments, we'll have today's This Land of Ours report, but first, more of the day's agriculture news. And with today's AgNet West headlines, here's Brian Turman.
Growers and crop care professionals are being asked to participate in a biologicals survey. Extension entomologist and professor in the Department of Horticulture at Oregon State University, Surendra Dara, put the online survey together and said it will provide valuable information for future research.
This survey is to know the knowledge and use of biologicals in various crops in California. It will help us to understand what are the current uses of various biological materials or products like macrobials, biopesticides based on botanical extracts, or microbial materials and biofungicides, bionematicides, and so on. So this helps us to know what is being used and if there are any knowledge gaps and what needs to be done to encourage their use. This survey is going to be very useful for us to understand the needs of biologicals, and we can fine-tune our research and outreach efforts accordingly. When I share this information, regionally or nationally or internationally, it helps many people to focus on the research or applied research that helps address a lot of questions that the growers have, and also design outreach programs to fill the knowledge gaps in effective use of biologicals.
A recent report details how investment is made by various industries in lobbying on behalf of Farm Bill priorities. The Union for Concerned Scientists analyzed publicly available data on lobbying expenditures and found that companies and special interest groups across industries spent a record-breaking $4.2 billion in 2023. UCS reports that between 2019 and 2023, agribusiness, food and ag industry associations, and other interest groups reported a combined $523 million in federal lobby expenditures on disclosure reports that listed Farm Bill among these specific lobbying issues. In particular, the spending last year accounted for more than half of the 5-year total. The report notes that the agribusiness sector's lobbying expenditures have risen 22% in the last 5 years. Recent figures from the U.S. Department of Agriculture show that ag exports, including both commodities and food products, reached a value of $197.4 billion in 2022. Ag exports significantly boosted the economy, generating an additional $214.6 billion in economic activity, bringing the total economic output to $412 billion. The impact is measured using the USDA's Economic Research Service Agricultural Trade Multiplier Model, which assesses the employment and output effects of agricultural trade on the U.S. economy. The services, trade, and transportation sector contributed $73.6 billion, while on-farm business activities accounted for $70.4 billion. Other manufacturing activities added $52.5 billion to the total, and food processing contributed $18.1 billion. Overall, every dollar of agricultural exports generated $2.09 of domestic economic activity. The data highlights the extensive economic benefits of U.S. ag exports, emphasizing their role in supporting various sectors beyond agriculture. Researchers are looking for grower collaborators to help with projects looking at challenges in California rice production. Rice farm advisor Whitney Brim-DeForest highlighted the two different projects that are underway.
So there's a couple of different projects. So Ian Grettenberger, our entomology specialist based at UC Davis, is looking for some folks that might have tadpole shrimp that they believe are resistant. Basically looking for alternatives. He's going to be testing alternatives that'll still, control some of the tadpole shrimp. And for me, I'm looking for alternatives to our double propanol spray. A lot of folks have gotten to the double propanol because it's one of the only things that's working still, and I want to give us some other options. So I'm looking for collaborators that have really bad watergrass that they also believe is resistant to hopefully multiple herbicides. So I'm trying to do a post-emergent foliar spray, and so the commitment from me is pretty minimal commitment for the growers, and I think Ian's is also pretty minimal. He just needs to collect some shrimp out of the field or some soil to hatch the shrimp out of the field.
A new comprehensive and advanced learning experience in indoor farming is now being made available for growers. UC Agriculture and Natural Resources Vine Initiative, along with UC Davis Continuing and Professional Education, have opened enrollment for their new Controlled Environment Agriculture program. Courses are set to begin on July 1st. The CEA program is designed to provide a deep understanding of both the scientific and practical aspects of indoor farming. The series of 4 detailed courses designed to be completed in less than a year are offered through a flexible online platform. Individual course topics include an introduction to controlled environment agriculture, plant production and indoor farming, post-harvest processes and food safety, and data-driven growing. An informational session going over the course is scheduled for June 6th, with more information available at bit.ly/indooraginfo. I'm Brian German for AgNet West Radio Network.
Mexico's new president vows commitment to the USMCA. That's coming up on This Land of Ours. Mexico has a new president, and that could have implications for U.S. farm trade with our #1 foreign market. Claudia Sheinbaum became the first woman and first Jewish president elected to the president of predominantly Catholic and patriarchal Mexico. But American Farm Bureau Senior Director of Government Affairs Dave Salmonson says early indications are she will continue the status quo in farm trade.
Now, she has said immediately after being elected, she wants to continue the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement. Her #1 priority is strong relations with the United States.
But that will depend on many factors, including how Sheinbaum deals with U.S. trade irritants.
Thinking specifically of biotech corn, somewhat less confrontational there. While there is an ongoing case, which we think will be resolved in November.
This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. Are bugs bugging you at your cookout or picnic? Gary Crawford has some advice from an expert on this edition of Agriculture USA.
It's summertime, summertime.
Yes, it is here, full force, and out there on the Major League Baseball diamonds, playing baseball in the sun are the so-called boys of summer. While many of us are trying to have cookouts and picnics and are fighting our annual battles with the bugs of summer. Yes.
Bugs.
Coming up, some expert advice about the bugs of summer on this edition of Agriculture USA. I'm Gary Crawford. Now, some people don't mind the insects horning in on things. After all, we are invading their space. But for some,
I hate bugs, any kind of bugs.
And so many of us go out armed to the teeth with all kinds of devices, all kinds of candles and foggers and zappers, you name it.
Yeah, there's a lot of products out there, and lots of them don't work.
Just like me. That's Kate Chapman, insect expert, University of Nebraska. And yes, the home catalogs are full of products such as devices that send out ultrasonic sound waves that are supposed to repel the insects. She says studies show those don't work. Now, some folks have those electric bug zappers, and yes, she says they might zap a few mosquitoes and wasps, but also they zap many other beneficial insects that don't do anybody any harm. Now, of course, millions of us burn a lot of citronella candles and such, which are supposed to keep mosquitoes away. However,
there's a lot of lab studies that show citronella can have a repellent effect, but those are lab studies with high concentrations of citronella, and we're not getting those same concentrations in the candles. And so while we're getting some out there, it's just not enough.
So is there anything that will help keep our cookout reasonably free of mosquito bites? Kate says there is something we can do days ahead of the cookout.
The best thing you can do is if there's any standing water on your property or around is dump it. So mosquitoes, the first part of their life cycle, the larvae, they actually live in the water. So dump any that you can find.
Meanwhile, here's something to try at the cookout itself. I'll just turn this fan on.
Fans work great too. A lot of these insects like flies and mosquitoes, they're not great flyers. So if you get like a standing fan that you can put out, you're not only keeping yourself cool, but you're also going to deter these flying insects too.
Now, finally, there are several personal repellents, and they do help.
You know, they're approved. They work really well. We have DEET, we have picaridin, permethrin for clothing, and I think a third one that was just recently registered and approved. It's called oil of lemon eucalyptus.
Kate says nothing is going to work 100%, especially repelling
mosquitoes, wasps, and bees.
Oh, my. Yes, but what about ants? One of my favorite 50s science fiction movies is Them. And what about those giant ants?
Is there any type of gas we could use? No, we can't take a chance. It might poison the whole city.
Which is being invaded by a slew of giant ants. Kate Chapman says normal-size ants are a big enough problem, of course. In some cases, folks just do not want any ants around a cookout or picnic. No tolerance for them, but it's really hard to keep them totally away.
You can always go the pesticide route with ants, but, you know, ants live outdoors. That's just where they're going to be. And you can do a pesticide, but chances are they're going to come back a week later.
Now, some people try the various bait traps and such.
We usually only recommend those if we find them foraging inside.
Kate says she gets a lot of calls from people whose homes have been invaded by foraging ants. Now, you'd think a simple solution would be one of those poisoned bait products.
But a lot of it goes down to what type of ant problem it is. You know, here in Nebraska, we have a dozen different ant species, and some ant species prefer the really sugary bait traps, and some ant species won't even go near them. So if someone calls me, first thing I say is, well, we need to figure out what it is. Bring me a sample so I can look under the microscope, and then we can go from there.
Kate says many people come to her after searching online for so-called surefire insect control tricks. And indeed, she says when you search for those, you'll get literally
thousands of hits that are going to tell you, oh, vinegar works, oh, cayenne pepper, cinnamon, things like that. Just kind of be wary. That's going to be my biggest piece of advice.
Except to start by going to experts like her right off the bat.
Land-grant universities across the country, they have extension. And that's what we're here for, is to answer those questions and provide you research-based information.
And there are solutions out there for almost every insect problem that's bugging you, except maybe if the insects are 30 feet long. That one might be a problem. This has been Agriculture USA. I'm Gary Crawford reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
April and May both recorded a significant number of tornadoes, but will the trend continue in June? Rod Bain reports.
USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey admits,
if we had talked back on April 1st, we would not have been talking a whole lot about severe weather in January, February, or March.
With only 160 tornadoes in the first 3 months of this year, a below average total. Yet over the past 2 months, tornadic activity in the U.S. has been near record-setting.
By the time we got to the end of April, we had seen, based on preliminary reports, 384 tornadoes, which ranked as the second most ever behind the record-setting 875 that we saw back in April 2011.
And then a more active May was reported, tornado-wise.
We actually saw a preliminary tally of 552 tornadoes during the month month of May. Perhaps even more remarkable is that we saw a tornado somewhere in the United States on 29 of the 31 days during the month of May. The only days that were void of tornado activity, May 15th and May 18th.
If that preliminary May tornado count holds,
historically, that compares just like April as the second most tornadic May in record going back to the mid-20th century, 1950.
Rippey acknowledges storms could be consolidated to reduce the total counts, yet both months should still be near record-setting number-wise. As for locations where much of the activity was concentrated,
the two big strips, when you look at all these tornado reports on a map, there's one area stretching from the central Great Plains into the upper Midwest, and then a second pretty much parallel path running from the southern Great Plains into the Ohio Valley, and that is the two big concentrations of tornadoes.
So what is the potential for an active June from an active weather standpoint? Rippey says sometime this week,
it looks like the weather pattern is going to settle down. The big change is that we have a large ridge or dome of high pressure building across the western United States, and concurrently we'll have a big dip in the jet stream across the eastern half of the country. That is pretty much the opposite pattern that we've been seeing for quite a while, where we have more of a bit of a dip in the jet stream across the northwest, and that has been a conduit for a lot of these April and May thunderstorms. They come in through the northwest, and then they just erupt across the nation's midsection.
So with this change in weather patterns,
we are going to see a much more stable jet stream configuration across the United States, cooler and generally drier weather moving into the central United States, and then we'll see hot and dry weather in the west.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
This is the AgNet News Hour. We will be back in just a moment with more agriculture news. Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. At the AgriPulse Food and Ag Policy Issues Summit held in Sacramento on Tuesday, President and CEO of the Almond Board of California, Clarice Turner, joined virtually and talked with AgriPulse founder and president Sarah Wyatt. She also gave an update on the almond industry. Here are some of her comments.
USDA's National Ag Statistics Service released its initial subjective forecast, and we're talking about production forecast of 3 billion pounds. Talk a little bit about how that compares to prior year, and what does that mean overall for your grower community?
Yeah, it was pretty much what we expected, given that we had a good bloom season this year. You know, the rain stopped at the right time so the bees could fly and do their thing. So that's always a beautiful thing when that happens, because when the rain is pouring down, they don't get to do that. So it was great that we had pretty much an optimal bloom this year. So it's what we expected, and it's reflective of the good work of our farmers out there who work very hard to nurture those orchards to make sure that their yields are going to be strong. So I would say that just again, having come across so many different buyers across the world, it's very evident to me that demand is very strong and will continue to be strong. So I think the 3 billion pound crop, you know, one of the things that I heard all across the world was that California is known not only for amazing quality, but also consistency in supply, which is super interesting phenomenon, and something that is very important to the industry, because, you know, I didn't mention I led food for Starbucks, and when you are part of a large organization and you're trying to create products that people absolutely love, you can't run out of an ingredient because they don't like it when you substitute something. So if you think about some of the larger producers, General Mills or Kraft or PepsiCo, that produce cereals and nutrition bars, and you can't run out of almonds, right? So having that consistent supply, especially when you're that huge globally, is very, very important. So that is one of the very important roles that California almonds play, is we do have volume and we do have it consistently. It's more difficult when you're farming in a Mediterranean environment where you don't, you're dry farming, for example, your yields are going to vary consistent or inconsistently from year to year. So we've had a lot of innovation in that space, and it really allows us to be efficient with our farming and consistent in our production.
So it's nice to always get some good news when we're in this room talking about things, and having good news on the demand side sounds like a really positive message going forward for your organization.
Yes. Well, it's interesting. This year we shipped more almonds than we grew, and that hasn't happened for a while. And so now what we're starting to see is the carryout of our essentially inventory from one year to the next is coming below 500 million pounds, which has not happened in several years. So that's a great thing. We still have enough to get the entire world through with consistent supply. We might run out of a few different varieties here and there, the more popular ones. But we haven't seen that in a long time, Sarah. So it's really great to see. It's great for our farmers. And we're starting to see orders coming in. Like I was mentioning, some of the bigger players, putting in multiple year orders because they have confidence level that we'll be able to supply large volumes across a number of years. So it's great. It's really, I think, an inflection point for the industry. In fact, this year, I'll just quote you some statistics because I know you were curious about this. And, we are a federal marketing order. We're quasi-government. We are overseen by the USDA. So if we state a statistic, it has to be true. And we have to research it. If we're talking about, a nutritional benefit, that means that somebody's done research that has been corroborated academically more than 3 times before we can even mention it. And we can't claim it unless the USDA tells us we can. So right now we only have a hard claim. But in this past year, this April, for example, our shipments were up 22% over last year. And year to date, they're up 5% overall. 4% overall, and exports are up 5%. So we're definitely seeing consistent demand and shipments, importantly, because that's what demonstrates how much is actually getting shipped out. So we expect that that's going to continue to grow.
Thank you for that. Yes, we all understand in the reporting business how USDA has a strong oversight over any of the checkoff organizations, so there's quite a process. We talked about sustainability and circular economy and things this morning a little bit. I know that the board has established a goal of zero waste in the system of growing almonds, and you're doing some work on trying to make sure that you can better utilize the hulls, even perhaps as a food ingredient. So talk to us a little bit about how that's going and what you might need to see changed on the regulatory front to advance that.
Yeah, this is actually a really exciting area that we're in the midst of. Almonds are zero waste, right? Nothing in an almond orchard goes to waste. It goes somewhere. Somebody's buying it, somebody is using it. The hulls are used as livestock feed, and they're very nutritious. And we're developing new uses for those. And you alluded to that. We have applied for GRAS status, which is generally acceptable status. Oh boy, I'm learning all the government side of this. So
okay, recognized as safe, yeah.
Yes, it's essentially the approval for us to be able to use that as human food. That is a huge unlock because if you use the hulls for formulating a product like a nutrition bar, and we worked with Matson to do some research and trials on this, it brings up immediately your fiber levels, your protein levels, your calcium levels, many things that people that are particularly in the snack area, in broadly produced food, I'll say in snacks, are trying really hard, a lot of shareholder pressure to try to reformulate those products to make them be healthier and provide some fiber. And so this is right product, right place, right time. We expect that in the spring we should be being able to get that GRAS status certification. So we're getting a lot of calls about it already. People are excited about it because they're trying to do the right thing, and it's difficult sometimes because your input products, one, you need consistent supply, like I said, and two, you're always worried about pricing.
Thank you again to AgriPulse and AgriPulse founder and president Sarah Wyant. That was the president and CEO of the Almond Board of California, Clarice Turner. This segment is brought to you by Live Earth Products. To get to know a little more about Live Earth Products, we're talking on the phone today with Vice President Russell Taylor. And to start us out, Russell, tell us about the Conservationist of the Year and what goals you would like to see occur this year.
So this is continuing work as the Certified Crop Advisor Conservationist of the Year. They're looking for certified crop advisors who are trying to aid farmers in getting information or conservation practices. One thing we've identified that is keeping farmers from getting conservation practices is actually just information and products. The current federal regulations actually were written in the 1950s. And at that time, those rules were only restricting fertilizers and pesticides. They didn't put into account other developing technologies such as plant biostimulants and some of these newer technologies we're using in agriculture. And so for 2024, our goal is to really help change the laws that are impacting biostimulant regulation to allow them to be used and treated as a fertilizer, not as a pesticide.
So, what does that process look like to go through that and get that change to be where it needs to be?
Well, actually, there's a very long on-ramp. We've been working on this since 2014, and the bricks that we've laid on this path are now hopefully being included in the Farm Bill. So more than anything now, it's just supporting the work we've already done, trying to get legislators aware of the problem and hopefully enact those rules. There's an act right now by California regulators. It's called the Plant Biostimulant Act. And so the best thing that farmers can do is call up and say, hey, we support this language. This is going to give us more tools to enact those conservation practices and have more products available to us.
Thank you, Russell. To get to know more about Live Earth products, you can visit them online at liveearth.com. That is spelled LIVEARTH.com. You're listening to the AgNet News Hour. Now for more news. Head of Rabobank Rabo Research Food and Agribusiness in North America, Dr. Roland Fumazi says there are two sides to the food production coin. On one side, nations around the world are becoming more developed.
There's a flip side to that coin, unfortunately. And those same positive economic forces as countries develop around the world that are great for food demand also can put tremendous pressure on what is already a challenging farm labor situation.
In addition, the trends in worker ages show fewer younger workers in ag labor and more who are 50 years old or older.
In previous decades, we added a lot of young people, under 20, 20 to 49, etc., and that trend has significantly slowed down, right? The driver of that are birth rates declining. And that is one of the consequences of economic development in countries around the world. As countries get more economically developed, their birth rates decline.
Fumazi says there are a few factors for the U.S. to consider in order to keep an adequate ag workforce in coming decades, such as working on better immigration policies tied to agriculture, increasing pay rates, and generally making the U.S. more competitive in the worldwide ag labor space.
Demographic changes going on around the world are not favorable for U.S. agricultural labor. Right? But again, I reiterate, what I'm showing you here is that overall pool or pie will continue to get smaller. Is there a way for us maybe to get a bigger slice of a smaller pie? Probably.
Fumazi was speaking at the AgriPulse Ag and Food Policy Summit in Sacramento, California on Tuesday. That's today's top agriculture news. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. Thank you for sharing your morning with us.
To get more information on the topics you heard today, visit AgNet West online at agnetwest.com. You can also stay connected by following us on our social media at AgNet West on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also find our broadcast team of Brian German and Sabrina Halvorson on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you for listening to the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. AgNet West Radio Network, your primary choice for agriculture news.